Hello, fourth graders. Today's lesson is lesson 4, and we are going to learn about knights and castles. So your vocabulary for today: armor is a noun, and it's a protective covering used to keep a person safe from injury during battle. Esteemed is an adjective, highly regarded or admired. Influential is an adjective, having power to change or affect important things or people. A title is a noun, and it's a name that describes a person's job or status. Ransom is a noun, money that is paid to free someone who was captured. Aspiring is an adjective, hoping to be or become something. Enclose is a verb, to surround or close in. And a siege is a noun, and it's a situation in which soldiers or police officers surround a city or building to try and take control of it. Okay, so we're reading chapter 3 today, which is called Gloomy Castles and Jousting Knights. And our big question is, why was there a need for knights and castles during the Middle Ages? Whether rich or poor, young men in the Middle Ages learned how to use a weapon of some kind. Rivalries between nobles, wars with other nations, even violence between neighbors required that they be able to fight. When a lord needed to raise an army, he turned to those he governed. In the Middle Ages, ordinary foot soldiers were trained to fight with an axe and a long spear called a pike. Others were trained to be skillful archers or crossbowmen. Some foot soldiers might have worn chain mail, an early form of metal armor, but most had padded coats and carried daggers. However, the most esteemed soldiers were knights. This is a crossbowman and a pikeman. This is a knight in a suit of armor, riding an armored horse. Knights were soldiers who fought on horseback, and sometimes on foot for their lord. If you wanted to be a knight, you had to be able to afford horses and armor. You also had to find someone willing to train you, because it was very expensive to become a knight. These mounted warriors were usually sons of wealthy, influential members of society. Being a knight was one way of making a fortune. If you were involved in successful battles and wars, you might receive money or land as a payment for your services. Sometimes a king might also reward you with a title. Having a title usually meant that you were an influential member of society. Knights also made money by looting and by holding certain people for ransom. If you were a knight, this picture is a young boy training to be a knight. Your training to become a knight begins at a young age. You leave home to live with your family, to live with a family friend or relative who has agreed to train you. In the first several years of your training, you help to dress and to serve the Lord. You are known as a page. During those early years as an aspiring knight, you probably learn to use a sword, to ride a horse, and to wield a lance, or a long wooden pole with a metal tip. Later, when you are ready to learn a more challenging skills, you become a squire. Although you are still a servant, as a squire you are now responsible for grooming and saddling the Lord's horses. You are also responsible for cleaning and polishing his armor. You learn how to fight while riding a horse. You learn to use other weapons, including a heavier lance. This part of your training lasts for several years. And this image says, squires learn to fight with swords. If you are a successful squire, you might be knighted by the Lord in what is called the dubbing ceremony. The Lord taps you on the shoulder with the flat part of his sword. Then a priest might bless you with a prayer. This is a king knighting a squire. The way of the knight. In France in the 1100s and 1200s, certain expectations about how knights should behave in society were developed. The term chivalry, which refers to a warrior, horseman, or knight, became the term used to describe these expectations. These ideas of chivalry spread to other European countries. Knights were expected to serve their lord. They were required to honor and protect the church and weaker members of society. They were also expected to treat other knights captured in battle as honored guests until a ransom was received. Sometimes it took months before a captured knight's family paid up. Once payment was received, the captured knight was free to go home. Knights were supposed to be brave in battle. A knight was expected to guard and protect weaker members of society. This section is called Charge. Knights could prove their strength and abilities by taking part in jousting matches. Jousting matches were mock or pretend battles between two or more knights. Knights rode horses, wore full armor, and carried lances. Those who took part in jousts did so to gain respect, and possibly a generous prize. For the privileged, attending the jousting matches was considered to be a day of excitement and entertainment. It was very much like watching a football or baseball game today. When the joust began, the knights charged at each other. With the aid of a lance, each knight attempted to knock his opponent off his horse. Jousting was a popular sport, and knights competing in a joust. Cold, dark, and gloomy. Many kings and nobles lived in castles. Castles provided the inhabitants, or people who lived there, with a certain amount of protection from the enemy. They were also fairly safe places to store weapons and food supplies. The first castles were wooden forts. Later, people built stronger castles made of stone. Castle walls sometimes enclosed a series of small buildings, like a little town. The castle had a water supply within the walls. Residents also needed a good supply of food inside so they could withstand a siege. For added protection, some castles were surrounded by moats. The moat was a deep trench, often filled with water. Sometimes there was a drawbridge that could be raised or lowered. Over time, castles became more elaborate with interior courtyards, living quarters for soldiers, and stables. By today's standards, life in a castle was not very pleasant. Castles were cold and gloomy. They were designed for protection, not comfort. Most castles had only a few rooms. There was typically a great hall, a kitchen, and 2 or 3 private chambers or rooms for the lord and his family. There was no bathroom, just a tiny alcove that jutted out of the castle wall. The contents of the toilet emptied into the moat or a pit directly below. Can you imagine the smell? So this is a modern reconstruction of a wooden castle. This is a stone castle in France and a castle in England with a moat. This is an image of a medieval castle. We've got soldiers guarding the walls. This is a tower. This is the gatehouse, the drawbridge, and the outer wall. We've got a kitchen area. This is called the keep. The Lord's chamber is in this building as well. And also the Great Hall. And this would be the moat surrounding. A castle's Great Hall has many uses. The Great Hall was where family members and their guests gathered. Meals were served in the Great Hall. Entertainers performed there, and even servants slept there. Buckets of hot coals or fireplaces provided the fire needed for heat and cooking. Small windows and candles offered little light. Traveling storytellers, minstrels, and troops of actors often visited a castle. Quite often, jesters lived in the castle, ready to perform whenever requested. Noble children and adults in the Middle Ages enjoyed music and dancing. They played outdoor sports as well. Tennis, croquet, and bowling all began as long games during this period in history. These are medieval musicians. All right. So remember, for your comprehension questions, go back into the text, rewind the video, do whatever you need to find the answer in the text. Number 1 asks, which is not a reason young men became fighters in the Middle Ages. Number 2, according to the images on pages 18 and 19, which item was not used for protection? Number 3, who was higher ranked in the feudal system, knights or serfs? Number 4, which is a difference between foot soldiers and knights? Number 5, which was not a way some knights made money? Number 6, which is a difference between a page and a squire? Number 7 is true or false. It took many steps in order to become a knight. Number 8, what is the purpose of a dubbing ceremony? Number 9, blank refers to the way knights were expected to behave. Number 10, which is not an expectation of knights. Number 11, why is the section on page 22 called charge? Number 12, which is not a reason a knight would take place in a jousting match. Number 13 is true or false. Spectators came and watched the jousting matches. Number 14, how can a castle protect the people inside during an attack? Number 15, were castles built more for comfort or protection? 16 is true or false. Castles were usually made up of one single building. Use that picture of the castle outline to help you. And lastly, number 17, what did not take place in the Great Hall in a castle? I will see you guys next time. Have a wonderful day.